Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. In each episode, we choose a saga, explore its story and themes, and judge the actions of the characters at the Saga Thing.
And welcome back for the almost completely uncalled for second part of our discussion of Reykjadal Saga og Vigaskitu, the saga of Reykjadal and of Killer-Skuta.
Come on now, almost completely uncalled for? Is that how we're going to kick this one off?
Well, I mean, okay, let's try to keep this judgment free, but let's be honest. When we started this podcast, did you ever think we'd one day be recording multiple episodes on Reykjadal Saga?
I'm going to be completely honest with you and say that I didn't think about this saga at all.
That is my point exactly.
Mm-hmm. But now that we're here in the middle of the action, I say we go for it. Let's do this.
Well, it undeniably did make sense to break this discussion in half. I mean, there's already a nearly complete change of cast for the second part. We're going to have to get familiar with a whole new group of Icelanders here.
And many of them are then going to die.
Yes.
So, before we get too deeply into all those deaths, let's do a brief recap of part one, shall we?
I suppose we should. So the essence of the first part of this saga is the slow burning tension in the northern region of Mývatn between the family of Steingrim Ornolfsson and the nephews of Áskel the Gothi. In particular, most of the conflicts were started by Áskel's nephew, Vaemund Pfrenger.
Ah, yes. Vaemund of the Thousand Terrible Plans.
That's the guy.
Vaemund the Ox Thief.
Yes.
Vaemund, the bride kidnapping wedding crasher.
Uh-huh.
Vaemund, the sometime friend of Thorgeir Butterring.
Yes.
Vaemund,
obviously, old Butterring is important, but this is supposed to be the story of Áskel the Gothi.
Sure it is. That's what the critics would have you believe. Well, even though the various feuds and their resolutions are centered on Áskel's efforts to keep the peace, I think we both saw him as undeniably noble, but ultimately a pretty ineffective force in the end.
Ineffective, yes. Although I do think that turned out to be more of a reflection on, I think, the limitations of the law to create and enforce peaceful settlements. I don't really think it's meant to be a condemnation of Áskel in particular.
Yeah, that's fair, I think. Áskel's able to bring about settlements for nearly all the trouble his nephews cause, but, I mean, ultimately, there's only so much you can do to stop a group of unrepentant troublemakers like Vaemund and his brother.
So, there were a bunch of arguments, a number of incompetent plans that got quite a few men killed, actually, and finally, a disastrous failed attack by Steingrim Ornolfsson and his men that resulted in Steingrim and several of his followers falling into a frozen river, while Vaemund and his crew threw spears at them.
Yeah, and Steingrim dies in that disaster.
Yep.
So Vaemund's greatest victory came because some thin ice broke under his enemy's feet. It's not that big a deal. I mean, it's almost a shame that Vaemund dies of an illness shortly after and then doesn't really enjoy this lame victory for very long.
Well, but in addition, both sides do suffer a loss on the day of the fight. One of Steingrim's followers, Thorir Ketilsson, slid across the ice and managed to fatally wound poor old Áskel the Gothi. Áskel manages to arrange a generous settlement for his own death before dying. And even on his deathbed, Áskel is still trying to maintain peace in the region.
Oh, Áskel. But, as we're going to see this time out, he's also still failing to maintain that peace, as usual. Áskel's younger son, Skuta, is out of Iceland when the settlement for Áskel's death is agreed upon, and that's an important detail.
It is, because it means that he hasn't agreed not to seek revenge for his father's death. And as we rejoin the saga, Skuta's about to earn his nickname, Killer-Skuta.
And since most of the major figures from last time died halfway through the saga, we have a mostly new cast of characters to get to know, although they'll be connected to the first half through the sides that they were on when Áskel died, at least at first anyway.
Right, more or less. So last time we had the story of a man who tries almost alone against the world to maintain a fragile peace. And this time we have the story of a man who comes charging into the last fragile piece his father made and smashes it all to pieces.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. Well done.
And as was the case last time, there's a limit to how much scholarly history we can bring to bear on all this, since not a lot of people have spent their time exploring or explaining Reykjadal Saga.
Well, we said last time that Reykjadal Saga isn't exactly a critical darling.
Yeah, decidedly not. Put it this way. If anyone out there is really looking for a chance to write some original scholarship, this is the text to write about. Reykjadal Saga is the scholarly equivalent of New Fallen Snow.
Oh, that's both lovely and accurate. Well done, John.
Well, it's true. Anything you do is bound to make an impression.
Exactly. Well, let's dig in.
All right. Part 1. Big Trouble in Little Mývatn.
So, we are picking up the action of the saga a year after the deaths of Áskel the Gothi, Steingrim Ornolfsson, and Vaemund Fringe. Which means that we're a little depleted character-wise, and the saga wastes no time in introducing a bunch of new figures for us.
Yeah, I mean, this really feels like hitting the reset button. And we're introduced to 4 new families right away, and a total of 15 new people.
Oh, it's a cakewalk compared to last time.
See, you're being sarcastic, I can tell. But we'll keep it simple for everyone. So the patriarchs of the 4 families are an unpopular troublemaker named Thorberg Cheekstruck, a well-respected lawyer and warrior named Arnor Thorgrimsson, a powerful farmer named Giri of Girastadr, and Giri's neighbor, Hall of Sandfell.
Yeah, that's not too bad. And hearing you list those out, having read the saga now, I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, now I see how all those episodes link together. I should have known.
That's what we do.
Yeah. I should add, Hall of Sandfell has a daughter named Thorkatla, and the other 3 all have multiple sons who are going to have roles to play in what comes next.
Right. And meanwhile, there have been some political changes in the region. Remember, Áskel was the local Gothi, or chieftain, so his death created a power vacuum in Mývatn.
Right, and the next generation isn't helping.
No.
Áskel's son Thorstein has taken over the family farm, but in a somewhat surprising move, he sells off the chieftaincy that his father held.
Right, now selling a chieftaincy isn't unheard of, but it's definitely unusual. And it's even stranger when you consider that Thorstein's only a co-owner of the chieftaincy. His partner is his brother Skuta, who we haven't seen yet in the saga.
No, but his time's coming, just wait. Skuta returns to Iceland the summer following the settlement for his father's death, and he remains with his brother for 6 months, but he's kind of sullen and withdrawn the entire time.
Yeah, he really doesn't make any secret of his dissatisfaction with the settlement.
No. Well, remember that it was Askel's dying wish that the settlement be peaceful, but peaceful solutions to problems aren't really Skuta's cup of mead.
No. Now, it can be difficult to keep all the parties happy in a lawsuit at the best of times. And as the scholar Vestin Olesen points out, this is hardly the best of times.
Yeah.
Olesen notes that Skuta, who's an undeniable stakeholder in the outcome of the suit over his father's death, can destroy the entire agreement simply by refusing to be a party to it, or even just by ignoring it.
Well, that makes sense. There's a cost to breaking an agreement, but that cost is mostly to your relationships with those who negotiated the deal, and maybe a bit to your reputation. And Skuta isn't beholden to anyone involved in the settlement negotiation, except his father and brother. And his father's dead, so...
Well, and as we're going to see in this episode, Skuta's not all that concerned with his public image either.
Yeah, and that makes him kind of dangerous. I mean, the restrictions that honor places on most Icelanders doesn't always seem to work on Skuta, kind of like Gret here. He's more single-minded than a lot of other saga figures.
And right now, he's planning to get to work.
Yes, he is.
So in the spring, the brothers reach a solution. Thorstein will keep the family farm, but Skuta takes the movable wealth and buys a new farm. He also, significantly, takes with him his brother's permission to seek blood vengeance for their father's death.
Which is kind of odd, at least in the sagas, to have that kind of thing go down. It strikes me as being a little bit more than disingenuous on Thorstein Askelson's part. He said that he would uphold his father's desire for peace, and here he is kind of disrupting that.
Does he, though? I think Thorstein phrased his agreement very carefully. If you recall, he said, "I will not find a better course of action for myself than that I should imitate what he did, and I will not block this settlement."
Yeah, and that's very well done. It's intentionally ambiguous, isn't it?
I think so. It absolutely is. He knows he's got a brother who's likely to come back wanting blood for their father's death, and his wording of the settlement agreement at least leaves the door open for Skuta to get a bit revengey on his return.
Yeah, that's right. But that's still going against his father's wishes. His father's all about peace, and he's opening the door for some hostilities. But either way, the settlement is on thin ice now. So while Skuta's...
It's cute.
You like it?
Yeah.
So while Skuta's picking out benches for his new farm, a Norwegian ship makes harbor at Husavik. 3 brothers own the ship. One named Vagen Spear, Nafar Shortsword, and Skefil Sword.
Nicknames! I mean, not terribly original ones, but nicknames!
Oh, there's so many cool nicknames in this one. I think we're going to need a whole episode just to cover nicknames.
Well, I always want one.
Now, John, can you guess what weapon Skefil's sword is famous for using?
I'm going to say nunchucks.
That's very wrong. No, all three brothers have excellent weapons for which they are named, and Skeffil's sword is, in particular, impressive and beautiful.
Now, these three brothers are supposed to stay with Giri's son, Glum, but Thorberg Cheekstruck rides out to meet them, tells them that Glum's far too poor to host them for the winter, and brings them back to his place.
Which is not true.
No, and when he hears about it, Glum is not thrilled that Thorberg's been spreading lies about him. But the damage is done, and the Norwegians end up staying with Cheekstruck for the winter.
Yeah, and the Norwegians aren't thrilled about that whole setup either. Mm-hmm. But they did make a deal with Thorberg, and as merchants, they have to be careful about keeping their word if they want people to deal with them. So they're stuck.
Right, but for some reason, Thorberg decides to keep messing with Glum.
And I don't understand why. I mean, this whole sequence, I know it's a kind of a repetition of what we saw in the beginning of the saga, but I don't get it. He's already got the Norwegians, and presumably that means he's got first crack at their cargo, so why not just leave it alone? Why keep pressing?
He's not a gracious winner, what can I say? So Thorberg's next prank is a variation on what I'm going to have to start calling the Mývatn Classic. He sends one of his workers to hide a horse in Glum's stable, then shows up in the morning at Glum's farm to search for it.
I do like that Mývatn Classic. I hope we see it again in the sagas just so we can use that. But I don't understand how this whole process keeps working. You know, hide the thing and then find it. I feel like everyone in the region has to be up to speed on the whole missing livestock gag by now.
Well, you'd think so, yeah.
Especially since Thorberg goes right to the farm of his enemy in complete confidence of finding his missing horse.
Well, in fact, everyone in the region is pretty sure Thorberg's full of horse manure, since he's well known as a troublemaker and, as the saga says, not popular among most people.
Sure, but, you know, with no evidence of foul play, no one's sure how to stop Thorberg from pressing a legal case against Glum. It's similar to what happened before.
Right, well, that, but also, Thorberg's got very powerful support.
Oh, I knew you were going to bring this up. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm just reporting the facts.
You just can't help it, can you?
I'm reporting the facts, and the fact is that Thorberg's partner in crime is none other than your newest thingman, Thorgir the Gothi.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Andy, I have to ask, when you chose Thorgir in the last saga, did you know that he was the sort of man to shamelessly support spurious lawsuits brought by spiteful men against their good neighbors?
Well, first of all, I chose him in the last saga, so his reputation there is what we're going by.
Oh.
But I think we both know that this saga can't be trusted. So, I mean, if the author wants to cast aspersions on Thorgir the Wise, then I'll have to trust that
Thorgir the Wise.
I'm going to trust the audience simply knows better. Now, I don't think that you're going to find Thorgir cast in such a negative light elsewhere. But that said, I'm disappointed in how often Thorgir seems to get attached to these ridiculous plots in this saga. But my guess is that he's just a convenient, noteworthy name for the region, and the author's just kind of grasping.
A likely story. Mm-hmm. So, Thorgir, his best friend Thorberg, Thorberg's two sons, Thorsten and Olvir, and the three Norwegians lead a group of 18 men to Glum's farm in the spring to summons him for the theft of the horse.
Now, normally I would say that this is probably not going to end well for the Norwegian companions, but there are three of them, and I'm not sure the Norwegian companion rule applies when there's three.
Well, it's an interesting question, and we do get to see how it works out right away, because Glum and his father Giri have no intention of putting up with this summonsing nonsense. When they hear Thorberg's party outside, they scramble for their weapons, send servants to ride for help, and charge out the door with 8 men.
So 10 against 18. That's not great odds for old Glum.
No, but they're not going to waste any time in evening things up. Glum and Giri team up to kill Thorberg's son Thorsten right away.
Oh.
But, as you say, Thorberg's gang has a numbers advantage. Or at least they do until Glum's neighbor Hall of Sandfell runs into the fray with 9 more men to support Glum.
Now we've got a good old-fashioned brawl going on, don't we?
We do.
And there are injuries and deaths on both sides. And while all 40 or so men are hacking away at each other, more men start riding up and joining in.
Right. But one of those groups doesn't join the fight. Skuta rides up with 9 men, but he decides not to get involved.
Oh.
Instead, he tells his men, "Well, I don't want to support either side. It will go better for those who are meant to prevail, and if the winner gets exiled, then it will soon be clear who the most powerful man in Mývatn is."
So Skuta is missing his upper teeth, I'm assuming. What's going on there?
I don't know. Is it too much?
Well, it's too late now. I guess that's what he sounds like.
I see.
Oh, dear.
Maybe he had a terrible accident.
That's right. Got his teeth knocked out. Oh, well. Can I just take this opportunity to point out that this scene is almost exactly like the scene in Chapter 6 when Hroi ambushes Vaemund?
You may.
Only in that scene, Áskel shows up and attempts to reconcile things.
Well, as he is wont to do, yes.
Yes, but that's not Skuta style, is it?
No. And it might be worth debating which of the two approaches is better in this region.
Well, I think it is worth debating that, but I think we'll save it for judgments, because it's an interesting conversation we could have.
Yeah, that sounds good. By the time the two sides are separated, there have been a total of 6 men killed. Thorstein Thorbergsson, one of Thorberg's workers, one of Glum's workers, and all 3 Norwegian brothers.
Ooh, so we had a Norwegian companion triple header, did we?
Is this a hat trick? Can we count this as a hat trick?
Yeah. We have to. And it's very impressive. And by my count, that's 5 men dead on Thorberg's side and only 1 on Glum's.
Yeah. There are a couple of serious wounds, including a nasty leg wound to Glum's father Giri, but overall it's a pretty impressive win.
And the settlement that's eventually made is just as lopsided. It comes out that Thorberg framed Glum for the horse theft, and so Thorgeir the Gothi and Glum's friend Arnor arrange a settlement that involves no compensation paid by Glum, despite the lopsided victory. But Glum and his father do move away from the region, so that seems to settle things for a time.
Right, which is exactly what Skuta predicted would happen. Right. One side was decimated, the other side is sent out of the area, which means there's a little more room to maneuver in Mývatn now.
Ah, yes, but there is a loose end to be tied up.
There is?
We have those dead Norwegians to deal with.
Oh, right. See, I'm not used to sagas that pay attention to Norwegians after they've been killed. Go ahead.
Okay, so in the settlement for the battle, no one claims a right to compensation for the Norwegians, and the 3 of them are then buried quietly nearby where they fell, and each of them with their namesake weapon.
So, Von had a spear, Nafar had a short sword, and Skeffil had a sword.
That's right. Sometime later, a bully named Thorstein Fishing Pole, yes, Thorstein Fishing Pole, he's going to give old Butterring a run for his money, isn't he? Thorstein Fishing Pole asks to marry Hall of Sandfell's daughter Thorkatla, and when Hall turns him down, Thorstein challenges him to a duel for Thorkatla's hand, and somehow the Norwegian weapons are going to come to play in this.
Right. Now, it should be said that Hall doesn't just turn Thorstein down. He goes on a little rant about how he'd never marry his daughter to a man as bad as Thorstein. It is known to many that a greater troublemaker than Thorstein can hardly be found.
Iceland is populated with really old, grumpy guys. All right, well, despite the big talk, Hall's definitely an old guy, which is why
that's the voice.
I get it. I understand. And he's old enough that he doesn't think he stands a chance in a fight with Thorstein. Now, fortunately for him, Glum's brother Thorkel Garrison is standing quite nearby and is glad for a chance to repay his brother's debt for Hall's support against Thorberg Cheekstruck. And that's a lot of names in one sentence.
Yes, it is.
And so he takes up the duel with Thorstein Fishing Pole.
Right. That's an important point. It's not explicitly stated in the saga that that's what's going on here, but it absolutely is. These kinds of support and these kinds of exchanges of support are how the game of honor is played.
It's fortunate for Hall that there's someone to take over for him because Thorstein has a reputation as a duelist.
Uh-oh.
And this is going to be the classic Holmgang-style duel. Each man will have a second who will hold his shield and protect him, and will use a single weapon. And Thorstein has a friend, Thorstein Bullcalf, who's held his shield in multiple duels before, so they're a good team.
Thorstein Fishing Pole and his friend Thorstein Bullcalf.
That's right, the Thorsteins.
I am so looking forward to the nickname discussion for this saga.
You should be.
Okay, well, fortunately, Thorkel has a young friend named Ofig of Skorth to hold his shield.
And he has Hall, who's willing to go dig up Skeffil the Norwegian's grave to retrieve the sword that he was buried with.
Right. Now, Thorkel's a little disturbed by the grave robbing, but he does need a reliable sword for this fight.
Now, unfortunately, we don't get much in the way of details about the duel itself.
Oh, that's an understatement. The entire description of this duel, if I may read it to you, is... Of their exchanges, it is said that Thorkel struck Thorstein his death blow. The end.
That's really disappointing, especially after we spent time building this fight up. Why we have to have more.
There's a second duel right away, if that helps.
Oh, right. The shield holders decide to fight a duel, and there's no explanation of who's holding Thorstein Bullcalf's shield since Fishing Pole's dead now. But maybe no one is because he gets killed too.
Hooray!
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. There's a strange interlude at the end of this section where Thorkel insists that the sword should go back into Skeffil's grave, until Skeffil then appears to him in a dream, thanks him for bearing the sword honorably in the duel, and gives it to him to keep.
Right. Sure he does.
It's so weird.
That sword becomes known as Skeffil's gift, and becomes an heirloom in the family. And it isn't long, of course, after that happens, it isn't long before people dig up the other two Norwegians to get the spear and the short sword. So all three weapons go back into circulation in Iceland.
Now that is some seriously casual grave robbing right there.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Like, I had a dream.
Exactly. No, honestly. Be that as it may, the loss of so many powerful figures in the area means that it's time for Skuta to start earning his position as the central figure, in this half of the saga anyway. It's time for... Part 2, Skuta's Revenge.
So up to this point, we've seen Skuta ride up to a brawl already in progress, put his hands in his pockets, and heroically do nothing.
Well, don't forget his winter spent moping at his brother's house before moving to his own farm.
Oh, I wouldn't forget that. He's really off to a raging start, just like we promised. But my point is that this is starting to feel like the first half of the saga all over again. I mentioned this earlier. We have a supposedly main figure who generally shows up after the important stuff's happened and then doesn't do a whole lot.
I know what you mean. That Killer-Skúta nickname is writing checks that Skuta himself isn't cashing.
Yeah, well, fortunately, that's about to change in a very, very big way.
Well, as the title of this section suggested.
Well, as the title of the second half of the saga suggests, it's called the Saga Killer-Skúta, right? So he's got to do some killing.
Right.
Yeah, but, the thing we run into with the section titles sometimes, I've noticed, is that they spoil the surprise sometimes. We got to be more
careful.
But, Skúta is going to get more active, and so that should sell you on listening to the rest of this.
That's right. In case you were thinking about giving this up and going and reading a good book.
Yeah, don't go read a good book when you can listen to this nonsense.
Especially not if you're driving.
So Skúta starts by tracking down and killing 2 of the men who were involved in the death of Skúta's father, Áskel Góði. So there.
Great. All right, let's get to it. Give me the details.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, because I just gave you almost all the details we have.
It's so disappointing. I mean, we are primed for this revenge narrative. Everything about the saga's direction suggests that we're looking for some serious revenge killing around now. And Skúta just, kills these guys off stage?
Not exactly, no. Here, the description's short, so I can just read it to you. It goes like this. It is said that a ship came to Knarrareyri one summer. I can't say that word, so forgive me. Skúta went to the ship, and he killed the first man in avenging his father. The man had been in the expedition with Steingrim when Áskel and Steingrim fought, as if Áskel fought with Steingrim, as was reported earlier in the saga of the people of Reykjadal. A little later, Skúta killed another man, who had also been at that encounter.
But that's it? I mean, where's the story? How did he kill them? What were the circumstances?
Wait, there's one more line. We are not able to report reliably on the circumstances of the deaths of these men, but we know this was Skúta's first revenge for his father.
Ooh, touche, saga author, touche. Well, that's disappointing.
Hey, at least it's a boost to the body count, so we got that. And besides, cheer up. There's a bigger target for Skúta now. A little guy named Thorir Ketilsson.
Well, that is a big target. Thorir is supposedly the son of Ketil Flatnose, who ruled in the Hebrides in the later 9th century. Mm-hmm. But I'm not interested unless we get some real information about the fight this time.
Oh, there are details this time.
All right, I'm listening.
So it turns out that Thorir is something of a serial killer. Not in the creepy waiting in the bushes outside of your house at night until you go to sleep and then play jacks in the driveway kind, but more of
what?
No, don't worry. He's not that kind. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but now I'm worried that you might be. That was very specific.
I'm just guessing, but my point was that Thorir seems to have the same problem we identified with Eric the Red. He keeps getting thrown out of different places because he's often involved in killings. I mean, shortly after his involvement with Áskel's death, Thorir is outlawed from the south quarter of Iceland because of his involvement in the death of Hroar the Góði of Tunga. So everywhere he goes.
Mm-hmm. So another Góði, huh?
Yeah.
There aren't that many Góðar in Iceland at a time. This guy has expensive tastes.
Well, Thorir's now in trouble in too many places, and so he comes back and asks Eyjolf Gerðarsson to sponsor him to overturn the outlawry from the north. Eyjolf reluctantly agrees to this and has Thorir announce himself at each of the regional things to get cleared of his outlawry.
People are putting up with this.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I thought Áskel was universally beloved. And this is the guy who actually struck the killing blow on him.
Well, Eyjolf gets Thorgeir the Gothi to help, and Thorir goes everywhere between the two of them, so he feels pretty safe. And everything goes well at first, but Skuta gets wind that they're at the Ljósvatn assembly, and he asks his brother Thorstein to help him kill Thorir.
That's more like it.
You would think so, but not really. Thorstein doesn't want to break the settlement that he agreed to, so no killing for Thorstein.
Oh. Well, I mean, there's some sense to that. As we hinted earlier, the brothers have agreed that Skuta is not bound by that settlement, but Thorstein is.
Right, so Skuta instead tells Thorstein to go with him and meet with Eyjolf and Thorgeir, and to offer to make a deal to forgive Thorir's outlawry, but Skuta arms himself for the meeting, carrying his axe, which he calls fluga, or fly.
Now, we should be clear that this means fly as in a buzzing insect, not fly like an eagle.
No, although both meanings do exist in Old Norse just as they do in English.
Right. So in this case, he calls his axe fly because of its buzzing speed or because of its bite.
I'm going to go with both of those things.
Well, and it might make reference to those clouds of midges that Skuta's home at Mývatn is known for.
I somehow doubt that, but don't get me off track. When the brothers approach Eyjolf, Thorir, and Thorgeir, everyone else puts out a hand to shake, but Skuta whips out his axe right there and buries it in Thorir.
Nice! It's a simple plan, but an effective one.
It is, and he even managed to get off a quick one-liner before running away. He says, I don't know if I could do this voice that you did. Fly caught flat-noseling, though he was sitting between the two Gothis. I don't have
much of a one-liner, really. It's not much of a voice either, but not much of a one-liner at all.
Sorry about that. When I was reading this, I could see that line coming, and I got excited. I thought he was going to say something cool after the killing, but I was promptly disappointed by Skuta's lack of wit. But snappy dialogue is hard to come by in the saga, so we'll take what we can get.
Yeah, it's true. We'll undoubtedly be talking about that as well in the judgment section.
So, Skuta does get away, but Thorgeir and Eyjolf are upset about the attack because they made a public matter of supporting Thorir.
Not to mention that Skuta's attack is a little embarrassing for them personally. I mean, he's just assassinated Thorir at the thing they jointly preside over, and despite their protection and their physical presence.
Sure, and he killed Thorir about a foot away from them, so that's gotta be more than a little upsetting. Right.
So, essentially, Skuta's got his revenge for his father's death, but he's made himself a couple of powerful new enemies in the process.
That's about the size of it. Oh, and before we leave this section, can I ask a question that I think that I already know the answer to?
Okay. A question you know the answer to.
Yeah.
It sounds like some sort of philosophy. Is this a Zen thing?
No, but, I just made a note a few minutes ago when you said that Thorir Ketilsson is supposedly the son of Ketil Flatnose. So,
that.
Yeah, why don't you explain what you were getting at there?
Okay, sure. It's pretty straightforward, really. I can't find any evidence of Ketil Flatnose having a son named Thorir anywhere else.
Yes, exactly. Now, we read a genealogy of Ketil Flatnose way back in Eyrbyggja Saga.
Right, I checked it. Eyrbyggja lists Ketil as having two sons, Bjorn the Easterner and Helgi Bjolin. He also has three daughters, Al the Deep-Minded, Jorun Wisdombrow, and Thorun the Horned. That same list is given in Laxdala Saga. Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, lists only 4 children. It actually skips Thorun. And a handful of other sagas mention Ketil's children, but it's always the same names. No one ever mentions a son named Thorir, son of Ketil Flatnose.
Except this author here.
Yep. So, unless Ketil had an illegitimate son recorded nowhere else, which I have to admit is a possibility, although it's a remote one, but unless that's the case, we've got us an imposter.
And I think it comes down to another example of this author being just a little bit unsteady in what he's doing. And that alone should help exonerate old Thorgeir the Gothi from the spurious claims of this author.
Oh, I'm not buying that.
Oh, come on. Anyway, so we're more than likely dealing with a bit of authorial invention here, aren't we?
Right, no, I agree. But I'm starting to suspect that this author really is relying on those local oral traditions we talked about in the last episode. It'd be great to think that there was an oral preservation of some Áskel-killing jerk running around Mývatn claiming to be Ketil Flatnose's son.
But, probably the author's just wrong about this like he is on Thorgeir.
Yeah, probably. But don't ruin my fun.
Okay, moving along.
Part 3. The Horrors at Robin's Rock.
The horrors.
Horror.
The horrors. Now, you see, there is a title that doesn't spoil anything.
So, now that Skúta's killed Thor Ketilsson, if that is his real name, he's got to deal with the consequences.
And those consequences are going to be pretty substantial. Skúta committed a killing of a man under the protection of two chieftains right in front of them at the regional thing. It's one of the more ballsy moves we've seen in the sagas.
It really is. And there's a price to pay for that sort of thing. Thorgir in particular holds a grudge over Thor's death, so he does what one does under these circumstances in the sagas. Mm-hmm. He hires a passing outlaw to make an attempt on Skúta's life.
Oh, that old chestnut. There are going to be, as there always are in these sagas, a couple of these little assassination attempts in a row.
Right, but saying that now kind of gives away that the first one doesn't work.
Oops. Yeah, but I think our audience knows by now that the odds of a transient hired killer successfully killing anyone in these sagas is incredibly low.
Well, sure enough. So Thorgir has teamed up with another of Skúta's enemies, old Thorberg Cheekstruck. Pow. The two of them send an outlaw named Grim to seek lodging with Skúta. Skúta takes Grim in for the winter, and it's only in the spring that Grim decides to make the attempt on Skúta's life.
Well, Grim's no fool, kind of. That's a winter's worth of food and shelter, so it's nothing to sneeze at for an outlaw. It's a good deal.
True. Well, the assassination goes nowhere. One day by the shore of Mývatn, Grim attacks Skúta with an axe when Skúta bends over to tie a shoelace. But Skúta's got a mailcoat on under his cloak, and the axe bounces off.
Ah, the old mithril shirt under the old clothes gag.
Hey, it's good enough for Frodo.
Yep.
And Skúta's able to overpower Grim pretty easily after that, and gets the whole story of Thorgir and Thorberg's plot out of him.
And then he kills him, obviously.
Well, no. At least not right away.
That's right. It turns out that Skúta's got a serious dark side when it comes to payback.
Yeah. We haven't seen anything like this in the sagas before. Skúta rows Grim out to a skerry on Mývatn called Hravin's Rock, strips him naked, and ties him to a stake. And before he leaves, he tells Grim, "And you'll be out here for some time unless Thorgir saves you."
I doubt anyone understood that. I'll interpret for old Skúta. You gotta put your dentures back in, Scooty. He said, "You'll be here for some time unless Thorgir saves you."
Oh, come on. Are you seriously going to do this?
But, how's Thorgir supposed to find him?
That's the diabolical genius of Skúta's plan. He actually sends word to Thorgir that Grim's out on Hravin's Rock and in need of help.
Which means that Skúta's no longer responsible if Grim dies.
Oh, true, actually. But it's mainly because it's a trap, and Thorgir knows it. Skúta's already onto him, and if Thorgir shows up to rescue a failed assassin, Skúta will have damning proof of Thorgir's involvement.
But Thorgir's not that easy to fool.
No. He stays home, and so does Thorberg Cheekstruck for that matter. And so, the saga author says, Grim died out there on the island, and was tormented most by hunger and midge bites, because he was without clothes.
Oh, he's eaten alive by insects. Wow, it's terrible.
Well, eaten alive is going a little far. He's stung and bitten and starved and dehydrated to death.
Well, first of all, it would feel like you're being eaten alive. And second of all, how is that better?
Oh, it's not. It's awful. Were we trying to make it better?
I apparently not. No. But the question is how Thorgir and Thorberg are going to take having their assassin fed to the flies.
Well, as you might expect, they're angry about it. And they've got a backup plan. They do the exact same thing again.
Yay!
But this time they send 2 men to stay with Skúta.
Well, then it's not exactly the same. This time the 2 assassins, who are outlaws named Olaf and Thorgout, are pretending to be Norwegian merchants and relations of the 3 dead Norwegians from earlier.
True. Actually, by the standards of the saga, this isn't a bad plan at all. And it does fool Skúta. Olaf and Thorgout stay with Skúta for a time, and he treats them very well. Then one day, a clothesline beam falls down, and as Skúta is lifting it back into place, the assassins attack.
Yeah, and this isn't really a bad plan, is it?
No, only Skúta's reflexes save him. He's able to leap away while the beam crashes down between them. But it's 2 armed men against 1, and Skúta left his axe in the house. So when Thorgout strikes at him with his axe, Skúta grabs a washing cudgel in desperation and bats the axe out of Thorgout's hands.
And somehow, almost as if this was an action movie, the axe then lands right by Skúta. He grabs it and immediately kills Olaf with it. But he's got a worse fate in mind for old Thorgout. So it's back out to Hravin's Rock.
Once again, yes. And again, no one comes to help. So like Grim, Thorgout dies out there on the rock.
Yeah. It's a grim death, isn't it?
A grim death.
Get it? Now, did anyone ever clear Grim's corpse away?
Nope. It's not clear how much time passes between these incidents, but it's been at least a year, because in both cases, the outlaws come at the beginning of winter. So when Thorgout is staked out on the rock, he's presumably got Grim's long-dead remains to stare at, while he slowly dies of frostbite and exposure.
Wow, that'll send a message. I thought I was going to enjoy Skuta, but he's getting a little bit dark here.
He's definitely getting a reputation as a man no one wants to mess with.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not the only man with a reputation in the region, as we'll shortly see. But first, there's another bit of trouble brewing in the area.
Another one, you say?
Yeah. Skuta's got a cousin named Eyjolf Thormundsson. This is the son of Skuta's aunt Thorbjorg. Eyjolf has a horse competing in a horse fight, and during the fight he accidentally hits the other horse's owner with a staff.
Now this is the sort of minor incident that can snowball very, very quickly. The other owner is a man named Bjarni Thorstinsson, the nephew of Killer Glum of Thera.
That's right. And that's not good.
No. We mentioned Killer Glum in our last episode, and he's got his own saga. It's called Vigaglum Saga, or the Saga of Killer Glum. And that one relates a lot of the same events as Reykjadal Saga. So this is an important moment in that it marks the beginning of the parallel narratives in both of these sagas.
Right, but at first, this doesn't seem like such a big deal.
No.
Eyjolf quickly apologizes and offers a rather handsome gift of 60 sheep to Bjarni, who in turn graciously says that he was nearly as much at fault as Eyjolf.
I couldn't believe that.
And the two of them part as friends.
Yeah, it was so surprising when that happened. I thought, this is a peaceful resolution? I'm shocked. But, it's rarely that simple, and in this case, it's not.
Right. In this case, the problem is that Eyjolf's father, Thormod, wasn't consulted about that informal settlement, and they're his sheep. So there are going to be problems at the sheep sorting in the fall.
Yeah, and we probably need to explain about the sheep sorting a little bit here.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. Farmers in Iceland, like sheep farmers in a lot of other places, used common pastures for their sheep during the warmer months. Then in the autumn, the local farmers gathered to sort out whose sheep belonged to whom before driving them into their winter enclosures.
Okay, and like the weddings we saw in the last episode, this was another moment when neighbors came together, and so sortings are places where food and drink might be shared, debts may be paid, deals were struck, and so on. And in this case, it's the logical time for Eyjolf to give the 60 sheep to Bjarni.
Sure, but like I said, Thormod wasn't consulted about the deal, and he doesn't like it. So he says to his son, "I think that blow must have been great, and moreover, it is greatly compensated for."
Which, for some reason, gets Bjarni really angry. Like so angry that he leaps forward and kills Thormod with a single blow.
Yeah, that got serious in a hurry.
I mean, I sort of see why. Bjarni thinks Thormod's statement means that Bjarni made a big deal out of nothing, or else that Bjarni will be perceived as having failed to respond to a blow. I mean, neither of the options is terribly appealing to Bjarni, I guess.
Well, but killing Thormod is still a major step forward.
Oh, it's a big step.
Among other things, Thormod is Skutha's uncle-in-law. And although Eyjolf doesn't have enough men with him at the sheep sorting to attack Bjarni on the spot, both men run to their powerful relatives to ask for help.
So now Skuta and Killer Glum are on opposite sides of the case.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this particular case isn't going to be the one that gets them into court. Glum advises Bjarni to stay with him for the winter, which he doesn't do, while Skuta 3 times advises Eyjolf to have patience with the case.
Which is usually good advice. The legal system's complicated, and moving slowly and deliberately is generally the best path to winning a case.
Well, sure. Unless you're Eyjolf, who, let's just say he's not that patient.
Nope.
So he travels to Bjarni's farm, catches him by surprise, and kills him with 2 blows.
Well, that resolves that now, doesn't it? And it's not so surprising. I mean, avenging your father's death is a serious duty in the sagas, and he wastes no time.
Absolutely. Remember, we've even seen people blood-eagling their father's killer before.
True. Now, obviously, this is going to be a big deal in the region, and Skuta is going to have to deal with the consequences of this killing. But for now, he's delighted to discover that Bjarni is a man of action.
Ah, he's a man after Skuta's killer's heart.
I guess so, but that means Eyjolf is now caught between 2 men named Killer-Skúta and Killer Glum, and that is not a comfortable place to be, John.
No, it's certainly not. Let's see how it works out for him. Part 4. Killer-Skúta. Killer versus Killer Gloom. Killer!
So, the entire region is in an uproar over the deaths of Thormod and Bjarni, and everyone is choosing sides, and they're doing it fast.
Well, when you've got two men with Gloom and Skúta's reputations involved, there's no time for quiet reflection. These are men of action.
Yes, and Gloom's ready to move first, but it doesn't work out the way that he hopes it will. Gloom puts together 9 men for a scouting party, but Skúta finds out about that from a friend of his named Havard of Isolfstunga. Next time, Gloom tries moving a larger company of men by night, but another of Skúta's friends has a dog named Floki that barks at them and reveals their presence. So Gloom turns his troop around and heads home, so it's just not working out.
Right. But once Gloom calls off the attack, Skúta and his men head out, hoping to cut them off. Both sides send for more aid, and by the time they meet on opposite sides of a river, each man has nearly 200 men supporting him.
We should be clear that these are astronomical figures for a regional dispute, especially in the north.
Yes. It's important to recall what Vestin Olesen said. This saga is a classic example of how small incidents are seen to snowball. Even as the usual legal channels are followed and compensation for a slight is being sought, both contending parties, Olesen says, have more often than not gathered round themselves a band of supporters, chieftains, and other prominent men, and each of those men then has honor at stake in the resolution of the difficulty.
Which means that every one of the 400 men at this river has a potential stake in the outcome, regardless of how loosely they're connected to the action at this point.
Right, which is why it's so odd that the numbers involved in something like this would get to be anywhere near this size.
Well, that and the simple fact of the population levels. I mean, bringing together 400 fighting men to this area would require pulling in support from pretty far afield.
No, that's quite right. This author has been throwing around big numbers all the way through the saga, but I think we're definitely straining the limits of credulity at this point.
Oh, yeah, it's just now that we're straining the limits. But, we have seen these kind of numbers before, but not terribly often. You remember that Henthorir, damn it be his name, had hundreds of men running around and getting into brawls.
True. And at least this author seems aware of the potential disaster that so large a fight could wreak on the community. Both sides kind of freeze in place. They're not sure of what to do. They don't want to fight, they don't want to run away, and neither side dares to cross the water first.
No wonder. I mean, remember what happened to Steingrim and his friends last time?
Right, no, exactly. But what Skúta doesn't know is that Gloom's son Mar has been sent on a special mission to summons Eyjolf Thormundsson for the death of Bjarni.
Intrigue. I think it's pretty clear. Well, first of all, let me just say, you've got 400 men, 200 on each side or so, and they're staring at each other, and we're going to shift the focus away from that to talk about.
I know.
This
author has his limitations.
Come on. Well. Anyway, it's pretty clear that Mar's being sent to summons Eyjolf or to kill him, whichever he can get away with.
Well, he certainly acts that way. When he knocks on the door, it's Eyjolf's friend Havard who answers. And Mar immediately runs him through with a spear without hesitation, yells out a summons to Eyjolf, and then heads back to the river.
Presumably riding as fast as his horse will carry him.
Well, you usually don't hang around a place after a thing like that.
No.
But when Mar reports back to his father, Gloom and Eyjolf Valgerðarson are pleased by the news and shout out a mocking announcement to Skúta that Havard won't be bearing you any more reports of our movements.
That's not a bad line. But, they're a little too confident in the width of the river. When he hears of Havard's death, Skúta shoots a spear across the ford of the river with a throwing string, and it kills a farmer and friend of Gloom's named Thrond.
And that's a classic move. Yeah. Pick out your man in a crowd, take him out with a single shot.
Oh. Except Skúta's not being remotely precise. I mean, he basically just shoots his spear into the crowd. It's,
Well, that's less classic. Still makes his point, though.
Well, I guess if his point is, I'll kill you, or maybe you. Well, I'm Killer-Skúta. I don't care who dies. That hurt my throat.
I don't know how to respond to that voice, so I'll just move on.
That was my best impression of what you were doing. I just made him angrier.
So, the two sides are stuck for a bit, until level heads on both sides make an offer to negotiate a settlement. The eventual deal is that Skúta's cousin Eyjolf receives a sentence of minor outlawry, and Gloom has to allow Skúta to marry his daughter Thorlog.
That part is just insane to me.
It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, so Killer-Skúta is now going to be Killer Gloom's son-in-law, the guy who's just fighting.
I know.
It's a little peace-weaving, I guess.
Well, but it solves the immediate problem, and as a bonus, sets up a wacky sitcom premise.
I would definitely watch that show.
Yeah, so would I. I wouldn't be proud of myself, but I would. I would watch that.
The Killers, starring Skúta and
The Odd Killers.
Well, the author sort of hints that this isn't going to go very well. The first thing we're told after their marriage is that Thorlog had 3 husbands, not all at the same time, and Skúta was the first.
Yeah, see, that's ominous.
Yeah, well, even if it's not going to last long, this new arrangement does create some surreal stuff. A while after the wedding, Skúta has another problem to deal with.
Another one.
Thorir, the so-called son of Kettle Flatnose, left a son behind when he died, and that son, Thorgeir, wants to avenge his father.
Well, it's a noble and worthy pastime for a young man.
But, it turns out that Thorgeir isn't so much a warrior type as kind of a nasty sneak. Kind of like a Vaemund Fringe in the first part of the saga. He's got a plan that sounds like one of Vaemund's. He and his co-conspirator, Thorod Gothi, use Skúta's booth at the Thing as a latrine for weeks in high summer to kind of insult.
In high summer. Oh,
yeah.
It's like a grosser sequel to Vaemund filling Steingrim's booth with cow crap.
That's exactly right. And not, to make matters worse, Thorgeir also raises a scorn pole against Skúta.
Now, we've mentioned scorn poles before. They were often constructed with a severed horse's head, but other kinds are sometimes mentioned as well. And you might remember in Gisli's saga, we saw a scorn pole that was an entire bas-relief carving of 2 men engaged in a sexual act.
Oh, yes.
No matter what they were made to look like, the point was always to curse or shame the target.
Yeah, well, by comparison to the Gisli pole, this one is pretty tame. But it still makes the point. Thorgeir is calling Skúta out.
You'd think someone would have figured out by now that it's just not that smart to antagonize Skúta.
Well, there are some slow learners in this saga, to be fair.
There's some slow learners in this podcast.
Now, Skúta decides to deal with this as simply as possible. He goes to the Thing dressed as a wood seller to get close to Thorgeir, and as soon as he's near enough, he drops his wood, and he buries his axe in Thorgeir's head. Thunk. And then he runs away from the Thing. It's a lot of running.
Well, it is a bit of an anticlimax, though.
A guy just got an axe in the head. How's that an anticlimax? But this is where the fun part comes. Gloom has to deal with the situation, since Skúta's his son-in-law now.
Right.
And so Gloom ends up paying the compensation for Thorgeir's death, which is pretty cool.
Poor Gloom has to feel like he's in hell now.
Oh,
on top of Skúta being married to his daughter, he has to spend his own money to cover Skúta's killings.
Mm-hmm. And sadly for those of us who like the idea of Skúta and Gloom's sitcom, it's not going to last very long. A little bit later, Gloom invites his daughter to a feast at his house. And
well, that's not that unusual. A little one-on-one time with a beloved child.
No, he tells her, hey, bring all your valuables with you. Come home.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of thieves around, you know. You can't be too careful.
Yeah, and when she gets to Gloom's house, there's a wedding ceremony set up and a Norwegian man dressed in his wedding finery waiting expectantly for her.
Well, that is awkward.
Yeah, it is. It's also a huge blow to Skúta's reputation. I mean, his wife marries this Norwegian guy who's called Eldjarn the Generous, and the newlyweds immediately leave Iceland. So, I mean, he's been essentially cuckolded, or at least humiliated. I'll go with humiliated.
And he knows Gloom was behind the whole thing.
Oh, yes, he does. And the text makes sure we're aware of the Greek chorus effect of the local rumor. It says everyone knows what happened, and everyone's waiting to see what kind of revenge Skúta's able to get on Gloom.
Well, I have to say that the daughter, Thorlog, is remarkably compliant. I mean, can you imagine being called to your father's house, and there's a new groom waiting for you, and you just
right.
go ahead with that?
Well, I mean, if you were married to Killer-Skúta, and then you met this guy named the Generous.
Right, no, fair enough. Fair enough. You're definitely moving up in nicknames.
Well, she gets to move to Norway, so,
right.
Well,
those local gossips you mentioned are going to be left as unsatisfied as we are, because Skúta, he just can't figure out a way to get his revenge on Gloom.
No, I think we can deal with this pretty quickly if you want.
Yeah, I agree. So, Skúta manages to lure Gloom out to a sheepfold by a ruse involving legal support for a relative of Gloom's. Gloom arrives, and Skúta catches him unarmed. Skúta has his axe fly with him, and Gloom knows enough to run away. Skúta yells insults to get him to stop, but Gloom just calls back with a verse. And, since this is the only verse in the entire saga, in fact, we might as well share it. Andy, would you do the honors?
Oh, I'm happy to. He says, "It's worth a piece of silver, each bush south of the river. The wide woods often cover, outlaw and wolf together."
That's a fascinating verse to me.
It is, and it rhymes, which is strange. I need to check the translation to see if it's legit rhyming. But let's get back to all that in a minute. Finish explaining what happens next, if you will.
Well, there's not a lot more to tell. Gloom is able to circle around to his farm and get a posse of 60 men together to chase Skuta. He's got a lot of men just hanging out on his farm.
Yeah.
Now, Skuta has to get away, and he manages to disguise himself as a shepherd and escapes after giving Gloom's men the old "he went that-a-way" routine.
Again, now this is all very interesting. Our author, I think he's up to something.
Oh, yes, he is, but let me finish.
It's not over yet? You got more?
Not quite. Skuta now rides back to his men, and there's a confrontation in which Skuta and Gloom insult one another's cowardice. But eventually, the two parties separate without any violence, and after that we're told, Skuta said that it was not fated for him to overcome Gloom, since whatever he devised to harm him failed. And so he gives up on the idea of revenge against Gloom and goes home.
Now, there's a lot to talk about here, so let's dig in.
Yeah. Let's see how many we can get through in about 5 minutes.
Oh, the old 5 minutes routine. Okay, so I want to start with the insults we just talked about.
Go right ahead.
Well, for starters, both Skuta and Gloom are demonstrating their discretion in this episode. There's a lot of men in the sagas, when faced with tactical disadvantages, who decide to make a heroic last stand.
Well, and sometimes they even win.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. This is a whole different thing. Both men are perfectly willing to turn and run when the situation doesn't favor them.
Yeah,
they're killers, but they're smart killers.
Yeah, it may not be the sort of thing that makes a legend, but both of them live to fight another day. That I got to be honest, that also helps make a legend, since you're still alive to do legendary things later.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Now, one could also say that their exchange is kind of a fluting.
Oh, I suppose it is.
So usually a fluting is a ritual exchange of insults, but in this case it's more literary in form. Each man has a chance to insult the other's cowardice and to respond to the accusations against his own behavior.
Well, that makes some sense. But while we're looking at literary motifs, I want to bring up the outlaw stuff.
Oh yes, and that was my next one too, so go ahead.
So what's interesting about this is that this saga, for only this one section, suddenly taps into a tradition of outlaw stories that's much more well known from English sources like Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're getting into the poem now, and it's a weird one because there's no other poems in this whole saga. But go ahead and explain what you're talking about with the Robin Hood stuff.
Right. Well, as you're saying, there's that half verse that Gloom shouts back at Skuta while he flees.
Yeah, the whole "wide woods often cover wolf and outlaw together" bit, right?
Right. I mean, for starters, as we've mentioned in outlaw sagas before, there aren't a lot of woods to hide in late 10th century Iceland.
No.
The idea of the Greenwood, this primeval forest where the outlaws live in a kind of protected Edenic paradise, that's an English idea.
And it's a bit of a fiction, even in England.
Oh, absolutely. So this verse of Gloom's references a fantasy concept from a non-Icelandic tradition in the midst of a bunch of other outlaw motifs.
Okay, so those other motifs are familiar to the Icelandic tradition, though.
More so, definitely.
Yeah.
So let's take the disguises. Skuta dresses as a wood seller and a shepherd in the space of a few pages. Those are both pretty standard outlaw disguises, but it's what he does with them that really sells the outlaw concept.
What he does with them?
Well, he uses the wood seller disguise to infiltrate his enemy's booths at the Thing, which is a fairly common use for disguise in outlaw stories, right? Infiltrating your enemy's stronghold. And the shepherd disguise with the "I went that away" gag it's a classic trickster move. Again, very outlaw-y.
Yeah, but that's pretty much what all disguises are for. I mean, they're for sneaking around and not being recognized.
That's true.
Disguise, right?
That's true. But these professions, along with professions like potter, baker, and clergyman, those are commonly the preference of the outlaw.
Well, and don't forget beggar. I mean, we saw that that one in the Spacer Thatcher at the end of Grettir's saga.
That's right. Besides, he also jokes to the men questioning him that his name is many in Mývatn, but few in Fiskalak, which involves a bad pun based on his name. Skuta actually means cave. And there are a lot of caves around Mývatn, you see.
Uh-huh.
And very few around Fiskalak, apparently.
Uh-huh. No, I do like it.
I admit it's not a very good joke.
I still like it. It's good.
Well, it's the sort of thing that a mythic outlaw does, right? Plays these little punning jokes on people.
Interesting though, but I thought that you would take an opportunity to bring up Skúta's fancy reversible cloak.
Oh, yes, thanks for reminding me. So we had a question from Greg on Facebook about descriptions of clothing and what it's made of in the sagas. It's a good question, and we'll try to run up a quick saga brief on it once things calm down around here.
No, we won't. Why would you say that?
Shush.
You liar.
In the meantime, we'll try to occasionally highlight clothes that get a lot of attention in the sagas we're reading.
Yeah, and this one isn't even all that important to the story, except that it makes it easier for Skúta to pull off his disguises. He's got a reversible cloak. It's white on one side and dark on the other. And while that's handy if you're on the run, it's also potentially useful as camouflage, given the amount of snow and ice in Iceland in the colder months.
Oh, that's true. I was actually thinking of being able to suddenly flip to a black or dark blue cloak when you're about to attack someone.
Sure, you could do that, and I think he does here. Anyway, but the saga doesn't say what the cloak's made of, but I think it's clearly a high-end material of some kind, and it suggests that Skúta's prepared for potentially needing to disguise or camouflage himself at any time. So, now, are we done with this section?
No. There's also the problem of Skúta's axe, Fluga.
Oh, that's not a problem.
Well, it kind of is. See, the problem is we've already seen him using Fluga, or fly, right, the axe fly, and we will see it again. But in the moment when Skúta surprises Gloom at the sheepfold, the author breaks into the narrative rather randomly to say, Skúta had fly in his hand. People do not tell the same story. Some people say it was an axe and was called fly, but some that it was a sword and was called fly.
Enough already with that stuff, you saga author. But can it maybe be both, like Schrodinger's hand weapon?
Nice.
It's both an axe and a sword.
No, because the waveform would collapse as soon as you unsheath the weapon. And that's a hard thing to deal with as you're entering combat, waiting to see which weapon you've got in your hand this time.
Well, I think it'd be more confusing to whoever you're fighting, but, okay.
So, now are we done finally tearing this section apart?
I think so. Let's charge on to the last section, shall we?
Part 5. Skúta's Trapdoor.
Is that a euphemism?
No. Okay, so we left off with Skúta swearing off further vengeance against Gloom.
Well, he admits it's futile, so given his personality, I don't know whether we should read that as meaning he's done trying, or...
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But this really does mark a shift in the text. From here on out, we're going to see Skúta on the defensive. And the main instigator against him isn't Killer Gloom.
And it's not Eyjolf Gerdason.
No, and it's not Bjarni's father Thorstein.
And it's not Thorgeir the Gothi. Well, it's not directly Thorgeir anyway. Now that we're doing this, I'm noticing that Skúta's got a lot of enemies.
Well, he's killed a fair number of people.
Yeah.
No, the people who are going to come after him now are our old friend Thorberg Cheekstruck and the sons of Thorir, the probably not the son of Kettle Flatnose.
Oh, well. So, old Thorberg has been sort of hanging around the edges all along, but didn't Skúta already kill Thorir's son Thorgeir? I thought we were already dealt with that.
Yeah. Thorgeir was the guy who Skúta dressed up as a wood seller to sneak up on. But Thorir apparently had at least 2 more sons. Thor de Lugi and Björn Thorisson. But you're right, there are a lot of enemies to choose from. What's kept Skúta alive so far is that for the most part, his enemies don't like each other any more than they like him.
Well, there are good reasons for that. I mean, remember, for example, that Thorberg Cheekstruck once framed Gloom for stealing his horse, and Gloom's men killed one of Thorberg's sons, so there's not much chance of them suddenly deciding to team up. I mean,
right, so Skúta can continue to deal with them one at a time, and not have to worry about a coalition of his enemies.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about Thorberg first.
All right, I'm all ears. You do it.
All right, so I'm going to rapid fire through these attempts, but they're worth covering at least briefly because I want to give Thorberg some credit for the variety of his plans.
Yeah, he keeps coming up with new wrinkles to try to keep Skúta off guard. I mean, they don't work, but at least they're original, and I would give the saga credit for some of the more, thoughtful plots and plans.
Right.
They're really trying to figure out how to mix it up a little bit there.
Mm-hmm. So, the first one of these, which by my count is at least the fourth attempt Thorberg's made to kill Skuta, is that Skuta's having some home repairs done, and Thorberg bribes one of the workmen to let two assassins, named Jotgir and Eyolf, hide in a partitioned space near Skuta's bedroom. Mm-hmm. But as Skuta enters the room, the partition crashes down and the assassins fall out. Skuta kills the treacherous workman with his own planing tool, and his men come running and kill the assassins before they can untangle themselves.
That's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's no staking his enemies out on an insect-infested island this time?
Not this time. Just a quick kill.
Yeah.
Skuta's getting soft in his old age.
I guess so.
So the fifth attempt Thorberg makes is to send his own relative, Audgisl, to kill Skuta. Audgisl comes up with a whole backstory involving being caught stealing from Thorberg.
You know, I do like the reaction this gets from Thorberg. It says Thorberg said that this seemed extravagant, but that it was likely to work.
Well, it is extravagant.
It is, but
and it works. Skuta's fooled, at least at first, and allows Audgisl to join his household. 2 weeks later, Audgisl tries to sneak up on a sleeping Skuta, but he steps into a trapdoor in Skuta's closet and sets off an alarm.
An alarm? What kind of alarm?
Well, a string with a bunch of chains attached that make noise when the trapdoor is stepped on.
Oh, I love it. That's close enough. It's classic. How does that end for Audgisl?
Not well. He does manage to get a stab in while Skuta's untangling himself from the sheets, but it just cuts Skuta's leg.
Yeah.
And then Skuta's up, and he's armed, and that's the end of Audgisl.
You know, but a commonality of these two attacks is that Thorberg can't be traced directly to the use of these hired assassins. Mm-hmm. I mean, in both cases, there's a layer of deniability that the evidence can't penetrate. So, I'll give the Saga author credit. These are kind of well-constructed attempts, and Thorgir does get away with it both times.
But of course, he's going to press his luck. Mm-hmm. And his sixth attempt on Skuta is going to be the biggest yet, because he next decides to ask Thorgir the Gothi for help.
Yeah, I wish he wouldn't do that.
Why?
Because Thorgir's better than this. We know that.
Apparently he's not.
I did not pick him for Thingman so that he could go get caught up in these sordid little plots. I mean, honestly, we know he's a much better person than this saga thinks he is.
You keep telling yourself that.
I think you know that.
Right now, he's the guy who's going to get 200 men together to try and attack Skuta while he's on his way to a local thing.
Oh, again with the big numbers. I'd say that's a lot of influence that old Thorgir wields, doesn't he?
Oh, wow.
Pretty powerful fella. I'd like to see Finnbogi pull that together. Now, doesn't 200 seem like a bit of an overkill here?
Well, it would be if they could find Skuta. But of course, the problem with
right
using
out of there,
200...
didn't he?
What's that?
I said, but he scooted right out of there, didn't he?
Ah, see what you did there?
Scooted,
see,
get it?
The problem with using 200 men in an assassination is that they're hard to hide. Mm-hmm. Skuta sees the crowd of horses long before they see him, and so he sends his men on while he rides out alone to counterspy. And when he tracks down 3 men who are on the lookout for him, he attacks them, killing a man named Vestman before riding off without a scratch.
You know, we haven't really addressed this yet, but this saga has some serious problems with violent behavior in and around the Thing gatherings. Yeah. And Skuta alone has committed killings at least 3 times at local things.
That's true, and it really doesn't seem to be in the service of anything. I mean, normally I'd suspect a saga with a bunch of violent acts at things to be making a kind of comment about lawlessness or about the decline of civility.
Or maybe about the recklessness of an individual who acts with contempt for social rules, something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but none of that really seems to be the case here. I mean, this is just a story where a lot of people happen to target one another at things. So the question becomes whether this is just a trope for this writer, or is it an oral memory of a time when the northern Things were having real trouble with keeping order, or is this something else? What do you think?
I'm inclined toward the second choice myself. It seems like this made its way into the stories told in this area, and kind of became a set piece for local saga tellers. But it's obviously hard to be definitive about it. What about you? Where do you come down on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, as much as I'd like to credit the author with a bit of social or political commentary, a little bit of historical stuff there, I'm just not confident enough in his abilities to pull it off. So I'm just going to say he likes having a bit of fun at the Thing assemblies.
Wow, golly.
Yeah.
So, once your man Thorgir gets word of Vestman's death, he makes a settlement for the killing, and this actually works out. He vows never again to take part in a plot against Skuta.
There's that wisdom. So, it's all sorted out now.
He eventually learns. Half a dozen plots in.
He's only a part of a couple of them. But, we're not done. We mentioned that the sons of Thor are Flatnose's fake son at the beginning of this section, and they still want a piece of Skuta.
Of course.
So Thorir's sons, Thord Illugi and Björn, seek help to plan an attack on Skuta. Since many of Skuta's enemies have given up on ever killing him, they seek out their dead brother's friend, Thorod the Gothi.
Now, this is the same Thorod who helped hatch the master plan about using Skuta's thing booth as a latrine for the summer.
That's the witty guy. Now, Thorod hears them out, but as the saga tells us, Thorod thought he saw at once what they were, and that Thord Illugi, in particular, was not likely to take vengeance.
Ouch.
Yeah, that is not a compliment.
No,
so
it's not.
Thorod's going to hatch a plan, and he tells the Thorsons to return in 6 months, which is a long time. Then he sends his cousin, Thorgrim Otterson, to Skuta's house under the guise of having fallen out with his family, and also to seduce Skuta's foster daughter, Sigrid.
Now, this is a little bit of an unusual situation, but Skuta does indeed have a foster daughter at his farm. She's the only person, aside from Skuta, who knows the secret of the trapdoor in Skuta's bed closet.
That's right, and this is the same trapdoor that Outgizel stepped on when he was trying to kill Skuta. This trapdoor, which I think is fascinating, leads to a secret passage out to a sheep barn nearby. Mm-hmm. And this is the whole thing's booby-trapped, but it's mainly meant as an escape hatch for Skuta in an emergency. And no one but he and Sigrid know where the other end of the tunnel is.
The question is, why would he tell anyone else?
I mean, presumably so that she could use it to escape as well. If someone tried to burn down the house while they're still in it, you want to get out.
Fair enough.
And so Thorgrim spends a winter at Skuta's house, where he and Sigrid conveniently fall in love.
As part of a dastardly scheme to expose Skuta's weaknesses?
No, I think they actually seem to like each other. But it's kind of irrelevant. Or at least Thorgrim seems to like her. Mm-hmm. And he also likes Skuta, who's treating him quite well. Huh. But he's also still reporting back to Thorod as ordered. So it's kind of...
Yeah, this is actually a great bit of narrative tension. And, there aren't a lot of them in this saga, so we have to give credit where it's due. It feels like some of the strongest pieces of characterization the saga writers managed. There's a real sense that Thorgrim is kind of caught between his cousin, who's both family and a friend, and the home he's found with Skuta and the lovely Sigrid. And Thorod realizes that Thorgrim might be compromised. He might not be reliable anymore. And he's starting to plan another way to learn Skuta's secrets. This seems like something that's going to pay off really nicely.
It does, doesn't it?
And
nothing. There's a missing piece of the manuscript at this point, which is kind of frustrating. Yeah. A little bit of a lacuna, as we like to say. But, as we say in the scholarly world with manuscripts, lacuna matata.
I don't say that. No. Andy says that.
I've never said that. Just now I said that.
You just did.
And it picks... I don't think I can leave that in there. That's really not good. Well. There's a missing piece of the manuscript at this point, and it picks up again with the Thorsons and Cheekstruck's son Olvir using the tunnel to sneak into Skuta's house. Ooh.
This is just infuriating. Mm-hmm. We finally got someone facing a moral dilemma in this saga. The story's reaching its climax, and the text is just missing.
I know. Yeah, we've had one or two missing chunks of other sagas we've read, but they've always been either filled in from other sources or unimportant enough that we haven't really addressed them. But this is the first time we really miss out on something that feels like we've been cheated, and the writing in this part is actually good.
Yes! It really does feel that way, like we have been cheated. I've read this at least 4 times now, and I'm still angry every time I get to this point.
Yeah, so sorry about that, everyone. We just don't know how it all kind of comes together.
Yeah, no, and it only gets worse when we pick up the narrative again.
It's true. The Thorsons clearly know all about the tunnel, and not only do they know how to get into it from the barn end, but they also know how to cut the rope so that the noisy traps won't give them away.
So, the brothers got the information from Thorgrim somehow, but we don't exactly know how.
Yes, it looks that way. Since they sneak in quietly, it's only when the Thorsons actually burst into the bed closet that Skuta wakes up. And as Skuta jumps out of bed, Thord Illugi runs him through with a spear. Skuta swings his axe one last time, and it misses Thord, but embeds itself in Bjorn's head. And as he dies, Skuta says, "Not everyone has been discreet."
Those are weird last words. Normally, I like a bit of enigmatic understatement as much as the next saga reader, but that's a terrible moment for it. I mean, does he mean that Sigrid was indiscreet? Does it mean that Thorgrim learned of the tunnel some other way and then betrayed him? And how did the Thorisons get the information when Thorgrim was reluctant to betray Sigrid?
I'm guessing Thorgrim had to give it up, but there are a lot of questions here and not a lot of answers. And later, Thorgrim returns to the farm and asks Sigrid to marry him. And even though she's furious with him for what she thinks is his betrayal of Skuta, and I think that kind of gives away who revealed things, she does eventually agree to marry him.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. And that still doesn't tell us what actually happened, just what she thinks happened. Mm-hmm. And it still leaves open the possibility that she told Thorgrim about the trapdoor in the first place.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it. The saga author gives us a really short eulogy for Skuta and says of him, "It seemed to many men the killing hadn't happened any sooner than was to be expected in Skuta's case. But nevertheless, it is entirely true to say of him that he was a wise man and a great hero, but not everyone thought him to be a reasonable man."
Yet that's hardly the unalloyed praise heaped on his saintly father, Áskel.
No. But then Skuta was a much more entertaining guy than Áskel as well, and kind of more capable.
That ending
he does
just
get things
rankles
done.
me.
Yeah. Well, if anyone has an idea of how to stitch this story back together, just let us know. You can send us your best answers to the problem of how the Thorisons found out about the trapdoor, or anything else you'd like to talk about. You can leave us a message on our Facebook page, where we're Saga Thing Podcast, or on Twitter at Saga Thing Pod. And you can also visit our WordPress blog page and leave a message there, sagathingpodcast.wordpress.com.
Or you can leave a note under the trapdoor in Andy's bed closet.
And that is going to do it for us. So until I see you in my bed closet, we'll be back in a couple of weeks to pass judgment on this saga. And I think that we're both going to have a few things to get off our chest now.
Oh, yes.
Thanks for listening.
Bye for now.
Let's not be hasty.